In March of 2000, a trader in New York watched 40% of his portfolio disappear in 6 weeks. He wasn't stupid. He'd bought the companies everyone told him to buy. Companies with no profits, no plan to ever make a profit. Stock prices that only made sense if you believed the old rules of business didn't apply anymore. And Wall Street had a phrase for it back then. It's different this time. It wasn't. Right now in 2026, the most valuable companies on Earth are spending more building AI data centers than entire countries spend on national infrastructure. And a growing number of the executives writing those checks are admitting, on the record, that they don't actually know if it will ever pay for itself. By the end of this video, you're going to understand 3 numbers that Wall Street would prefer you never connect in your head at the same time. The third one is the one almost nobody is covering, and it's the one that decides how bad this actually gets. Let's start with the pattern this has followed twice before. Every financial collapse in the last 100 years follows a shape. Not identical, the shape bends depending on the decade, but a shape you can trace if you know what you're looking for. Phase 1, a genuinely new technology or asset class shows up, and it's real. The internet was real. Housing was real. People do need homes. AI is real too. We'll get to that. Phase 2, money floods in faster than the technology can actually generate returns, because everyone is terrified of being the one who missed it. Phase 3, the financing holding the whole thing up gets more and more creative and more disconnected from actual cash coming in the door. Phase 4, something, a rate hike, an earnings miss, a single company defaulting, knocks out one card and the rest of the structure discovers how connected it really was. 2 case studies, then we put AI under the same microscope. And I think by the time we get there, you'll start seeing the shape yourself before I even say it out loud. 1995 to 2000, the internet shows up, and for the first time in human history, a company with 12 employees and a website could theoretically reach 1 billion people. That part was true. That part is still true today. But here's what happened to the money. Investors stopped asking, is this company profitable, and started asking, how many eyeballs does it have? Companies were valued on web traffic, not revenue. Some were valued on revenue they hadn't even generated yet, just projected. And then came the part almost nobody remembers because it's less fun to talk about than sock puppets and Super Bowl ads. Vendor financing. Telecom equipment makers, companies like Nortel and Lucent, didn't just sell their networking gear to the new .coms. They lent them the money to buy it. The customer buys the product with the seller's own loan. On paper, the seller books a sale. Revenue goes up. Stock goes up. Everybody's happy. Except it isn't real revenue. It's the same dollar moving in a circle, counted twice. When the .coms couldn't generate enough actual paying customers to cover those loans, they defaulted. Nortel, a company that was, for a moment, worth more than 1/3 of the entire Toronto Stock Exchange, collapsed into one of the largest corporate bankruptcies in Canadian history. From its peak in March 2000 to its bottom in October 2002, the Nasdaq lost roughly 78% of its value. Not 78% of the bad companies, 78% of the index, good companies and bad companies together, because that's what happens when a bubble pops. It doesn't ask for your resume first. Here's the lesson to hold on to, because we're going to need it in 20 minutes. The danger in a bubble isn't the technology. The technology can be completely real and completely transformative. The danger is when the financing built around the technology stops reflecting anything that's actually being earned. Remember that. We're coming back to it. Now, the .com crash was painful. Most Americans didn't own tech stocks in a way that wrecked their lives. It hurt investors. It didn't take down the banking system. This one did. 2008 is a different animal, and it's the second half of the pattern you need in your head before we get to AI. The housing bubble wasn't built on hype about eyeballs. It was built on debt layered on top of debt, sold to people who didn't understand what they were buying. Banks made mortgage loans to people who, in a lot of cases, couldn't realistically pay them back. Then, and this is the part that turned a housing correction into a global financial crisis, those banks didn't just hold onto the risk, they bundled thousands of these mortgages together into securities, sliced those securities into tranches, got them rated as safe investments by agencies that were paid by the same banks selling the products, and sold them to pension funds, insurance companies, and other banks all over the world. The risk didn't disappear. It just became invisible, spread so thin and packaged so cleverly that almost nobody could see how much exposure they actually had, or who else was exposed to the same thing they were. When home prices stopped rising in 2007 and homeowners started defaulting, the losses didn't stay contained to housing. They rippled through every institution that had bought those securities, which, because of how interconnected modern finance is, was almost everyone. Lehman Brothers, a 158-year-old investment bank, filed for the largest bankruptcy in American history in September 2008. Credit froze. Banks stopped lending to each other because nobody trusted anybody else's balance sheet. The S&P 500 lost more than half its value. Unemployment in the US doubled. It took years and trillions of dollars in bailouts and stimulus to stop the bleeding. Here's lesson number 2, and put it right next to lesson number 1. A bubble becomes a crisis, not just a correction. When the risk is hidden inside debt that connects institutions to each other in ways nobody has fully mapped. Eyeballs. Not earnings gives you a crash. Hidden debt connecting everyone gives you a crisis. Now hold both of those in your head, because what's happening in AI right now isn't choosing one pattern over the other. It's doing both at the same time. And that's the video I actually came here to make before we go into the numbers, and they get uncomfortable fast. If channels like this are useful to you, the subscribe button means you see the next one of these before it's old news instead of after. I put a lot of hours into pulling primary sources on this stuff, so you don't have to dig through earnings. Call transcripts yourself. Okay, let's get into it. Let's start with the eyeballs not earnings problem, because it's back, and it's wearing a new outfit. A handful of the biggest companies in AI, chip makers, cloud providers, and AI labs have built financial arrangements with each other that some 2026 analyses now estimate at more than $800 billion combined. Here's how the loop works, and I want you to follow the money carefully, because this is the whole ballgame. A chip company invests billions into an AI lab. That AI lab turns around and spends a huge share of that money buying cloud computing capacity from a cloud provider. The cloud provider, in turn, uses part of that revenue to buy, you guessed it, chips from the same chip company that started the loop, money in a circle, counted as revenue at every stop along the way. Sound familiar? It's the Nortel vendor financing playbook, except instead of one telecom company lending money to its customers, it's a web of the most valuable companies in the world, investing in each other, buying from each other, and reporting the same dollars as growth at every link in the chain. Even people inside the industry are saying this part out loud now. One of the most prominent CEOs in the space has publicly admitted that misspending a couple $100 billion on this build-out would be, in his words, unfortunate. The CEO of the company at the very center of the boom has said flatly that some investors backing this are likely to lose a lot of money. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's not a YouTuber connecting dots on a corkboard. That is the people running the companies on the record telling you the thing might not work. Now here's where 2008 walks back into the room. Building an AI data center is not cheap. We're talking tens of billions of dollars per facility for power, cooling, land, and chips that become outdated in a few years. The 6 biggest players in this space are projected to spend hundreds of billions of dollars combined this year alone on this build-out, and that number is expected to keep climbing for years. Where's that money coming from? Increasingly, debt. For the first couple of years of the AI boom, this spending was mostly funded out of these companies' own massive cash piles, or by selling more stock. That's the safe version. If it goes wrong, shareholders lose money, but the financial system doesn't seize up. That's changing. Companies that once swore off it are now selling tens of billions of dollars in corporate bonds specifically to fund data center construction. And underneath the visible debt on the books, analysts at a major credit rating agency identified roughly $660 billion in data center lease commitments that companies have already signed, obligations to pay, that don't even show up as debt on the balance sheet yet under current accounting rules. Say that number again in your head. $662 billion in commitments, larger than these companies' visible on-balance sheet debt combined, and it is not showing up in the capital spending figures. Wall Street analysts are using right now to judge whether this is sustainable. That's the hidden inside debt that connects institutions to each other problem from 2008. Except this time, some of that debt isn't even being counted where anyone's looking. And here's the piece that should genuinely worry you, whether or not you own a single tech stock. Remember at the start of this video I told you there were 3 numbers, and the third one is the one almost nobody's talking about? Here it is. The companies at the center of this, the ones doing the circular financing, the ones issuing the debt, the ones building the data centers ahead of any proven sustained profit from AI, are not some small corner of the stock market you can just avoid. They are the stock market. A small handful of these same companies now make up an outsized share of the S&P 500's total value, the index that sits inside almost every 401k, pension fund, and index fund in the country. When people say the market is up, in large part right now, they mean a handful of AI-linked companies are up. This is the part that separates this from a normal industry hype cycle. In 2000, if you didn't own tech stocks, dot-com losses mostly weren't your problem. This time, unless your retirement account is entirely in cash or bonds, you very likely have exposure to this, whether you ever bought NVIDIA or not. And it's not just individual investors. The Bank for International Settlements, the institution that effectively advises the world's central banks, published its 2026 annual report, naming an AI spending bust A collapse in the circular financing structure and fragile sovereign debt as the three biggest threats to global financial stability, all interconnected, all capable of amplifying each other if one goes wrong. That's not a fringe economist. That's not a channel like this one. That's the institution that sits above the central banks, saying it plainly in an official report. So here's the honest, uncomfortable summary of everything we just walked through. $800 billion in circular financing arrangements that echo the exact accounting trick that helped sink the dot-com era. $662 billion in off-balance sheet lease commitments, debt-shaped obligations hiding in plain sight, the same way mortgage risk hid inside securities in 2007. And a market so concentrated in the handful of companies running this loop that almost nobody watching this video is actually insulated from it, even if you've never bought a single AI stock in your life. Eyeballs, not earnings. Hidden debt connecting everyone. Happening in the same handful of companies at the same time, inside the index your retirement account is probably tracking. That is not worse than 2000 or worse than 2008. It's both mechanisms, running simultaneously in the most concentrated part of the market in modern history. Now, but I want to be careful here, because this is the point in these videos where channels tend to slide from here's the real risk into the sky is definitely falling next Tuesday. I'm not going to do that to you because I'd be lying, and because nobody, not me, not the smartest hedge fund manager alive, can time exactly when a structure like this cracks. But history does tell us what the trigger usually looks like, even when the timing is unknowable. It's rarely the thing everyone's already worried about. It's usually a single, specific disappointment that forces a repricing of everything connected to it. In this case, that could be one of the major AI labs missing a revenue projection badly enough that its backers pull back. It could be a credit event at one of the companies carrying the heaviest debt load, causing lenders to suddenly reprice risk across the whole sector. It could simply be enterprise customers deciding, in large numbers, that the AI tools they're paying for aren't yet worth what they cost, which slows the revenue growth this entire build-out is betting on arriving in time. The honest answer isn't if. Debt finance build-outs running ahead of proven revenue are, historically, not a permanent state of affairs. Eventually, the bills and the revenue have to meet each other. The more useful question isn't whether that reckoning happens. It's how contained the damage is when it does, whether it looks like 2000, painful but survivable for most people, or whether the circular financing and the concentration risk we just walked through turn it into something that spreads the way 2008 did. That trader in 2000, the one who watched 40% of his portfolio disappear, he wasn't ruined because the internet was a bad idea. The internet turned out to be one of the best ideas in human history. He was ruined because the financing around the idea got disconnected from what the idea could actually deliver on the timeline everyone had priced in. That's the distinction I want you to leave with today. AI is very likely a genuinely transformative technology. This video isn't telling you it's fake, or scam, or vaporware. It's telling you the exact same thing serious economists at serious institutions are now telling you. The technology being real and the financing built on top of it being sustainable are two completely different questions. And right now, more people with access to the real numbers are answering yes to the first one and we're not sure to the second one. History doesn't repeat exactly, but it rhymes closely enough that the people who paid attention to 2000 and 2008 are the ones asking these questions now, out loud, on earnings calls and central bank reports, instead of finding out the hard way. If you want to actually understand where your money sits before the headlines catch up, not after, that's what this channel is for. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one, where we go inside the exact companies carrying the most debt in this build-out and what their own bondholders are already starting to worry about.